Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to Monday, November the 30th, the last Monday of the term, if you can believe it. Of course, if you have an exam next Monday, then it doesn't entirely count, but we don't have one, but if you have one, yeah, for another class. But anyway, yeah, this is the last Monday of the term. We have made it to the final week. I'd like to congratulate all of you. Let's see who's here. Michaela's here. Good morning, Michaela. Ayushi's here. Good morning, Ayushi. Ananda's here. Good morning. Ashley is here. Good morning, Ashley. Kevin is here. Good morning. Good morning, Kevin. Hadil's here. Hi, Hadil. Good morning. Shania's here. Good morning, Shania. And Beatrice is here. Hi, Bea. And John is here. Good morning, John. Yeah, let's jump in and see where we left off, if we can recall. Oh, I think it was actually interesting, right?
Oh yeah, the end.
Yeah, right, Aliana? It was actually getting interesting? You ain't heard nothing yet. It's going to get super interesting from here on in. We talked about Mr. Gorbachev here yesterday, or on Thursday, right? And we said he becomes General Secretary of the Communist Party in '85. He's a reasonably hardcore communist, right? But he also realizes that change needs to happen, right? There's a lot of issues in the Soviet Union, political, economic, social. Basically, everything is a bit of a mess, and he realizes that, right? And so he wants to kind of take steps forward to fix what has gone wrong, right? So I asked you to do these questions on Thursday, and we talked a little bit about them. What else do you remember about Mr. Gorbachev here?
They came in with a lot of changes, and they didn't work out well, especially the agricultural one. Not that we were surprised, really.
True. So he came in, he had a lot of kind of new ideas. He was kind of reform-minded, if you will. He had success with reforming agriculture in Sevastopol, a place where he was working, but he tried to implement it kind of on a larger scale, and it turned out not to work. But nevertheless, right, he was determined and young and had good ideas, and so he was able to get enough support from the Communist Party to gain leadership. What else do we know about him? Maybe not too much yet. What's that? Yeah, well, Khrushchev is kind of the one who starts this de-Stalinization, and I guess it's to some degree that the smell of Stalin is always in the air, right? So that sort of very repressive, very kind of brutal way of dealing with the country is always floating around, right? And it's always there, right? And so, you could always accuse someone of being a Stalinist for being, really sort of firm or dealing with problems in kind of a brutal way. So I don't know that Gorbachev is so much trying to de-Stalinize. Khrushchev was, but Gorbachev wasn't. But again, that idea is kind of always in the air, right? This sort of, the man Stalin casts a large shadow, right? He was leader of the Soviet Union for 25 years or so. He was, he made the country kind of what it was, and to some degree that stuff starts to get talked about again. But we'll get to that in a second. He had four kind of broad policies, or four themes for what he was trying to do. And what were those? You're not going to do the Russian words? So there was acceleration, right? So there was ускорение, and that word ускорение, right? So he kind of realized that the country needed to get moving again, right? Things were stagnant, they were slow, they weren't moving, and Gorbachev says, we've got to get moving again. and he starts kind of setting higher quotas and kind of trying to inspire people to do more, right? Got to get moving here. What else?
He suggested some reforms.
What, what kind of reforms?
I think political and social and economic.
Okay. So let's talk about social. Let's talk about, wait. Let's talk about social. Let's talk about Glasnost. What is Glasnost?
How do you remember these words?
The same way you remember all words. You just remember them. It helps when you've studied the language a little bit. Things stick better, especially when you can see them written in Russian. I find it's easier to remember them when I can read them in Russian. But what is Glasnost?
What's the English word?
The way they translate it is openness.
Oh,
Yeah.
To
Say
say what you feel.
what you feel. You be you. Kind of.
What was that? I think TN did like censoring, allowed some media to actually read stuff.
Right. So he's giving people the right to speak, right? So he's kind of allowing some more freedom of speech. He's encouraging people to talk about the state of the Soviet Union. In the video we may see today, we'll see Gorbachev talking, and he says, this is a highly educated country, and all the most important conversations about the state of the country are happening around people's kitchen tables, because nobody is brave enough to stand up in public and say what's wrong, right? Nobody is brave enough to point the finger at this person or this party or anyone. And again, if you can't name a problem, you can't solve it, right? The only way to solve a problem is to actually identify what the problem is. And so Gorbachev is saying, yeah, let's identify what the problems are here so that we can move forward. Let's not deny what's happening. And so, yeah, he opens up freedom of speech a little bit. What else does he do?
He allows elections.
He does. Hi, Rose. And that's that Democratization part, the democratization part. And so, yeah, he starts to allow elections to post within the Communist Party. They hold elections, but only for communists, right? So it's sort of democracy, but it's more democracy than they had before, right?
He allowed them to happen with the Soviet law.
Right, and that's the other thing that happens too, is that he relaxes some of his interest in the Soviet bloc, right? I think we saw in the film on Thursday, he's giving a speech in the UN, and he says, it's the Soviet Union won't intervene, if the freedom of the people is first, and if the people want something, if the people want government, or people want this or want that, who should stand in their way, right? And so, again, all the Eastern Bloc countries' ears kind of prick up, and they're like, really? And then they all start pushing back, right? And they all start overthrowing their communist governments and tearing down walls. Some leaders get shot, right? Notably Nicolae Ceausescu, who doesn't want to. He's from Romania. Yeah, and so he's not too eager to give up his power, and so the people execute him, in public. So that gets a little bloody, but for most of Western Europe, everybody kind of, realizes that it's over, right? As soon as Gorbachev is saying we're not going to intervene, we're going to stay out of things, the writing is on the wall, quote unquote, right? Everyone knows it's over, and most communist parties either step aside, some of them dissolve, some of them try to sort of rebrand themselves, if you will, as a nicer, friendlier communist party. Some of them do get elected. So in Poland, for instance, we saw in the video that Lech Walesa is elected as leader of Poland because he's leader of Solidarity, and Solidarity gets elected in big numbers. But there's still some Communist Party people that get elected as well. So there's the influence of communism is not entirely gone, but they sort of quickly moved to a much more democratic and a much more open system than under the Soviets. And again, it's because of Gorbachev's policy of Glasnost, right, of openness. So that's Democratizacja, Glasnost, Uskorienie, and what's the last one?
Imagine a word with a nice ring.
They all have a nice ring to them. Russian's a beautiful language. Da? Huh? Restructuring, right? Perestroika. Restructuring, right? So he sees, Gorbachev comes to understand that the political system and the economic system are going to have to be restructured and rebuilt, right? Because again, things aren't working, right? And they haven't been working for quite some time, right? So big changes are going to need to happen, and Gorbachev is starting to see this. He passes an enterprise law in 1987. What's his enterprise law? Has nothing to do with Star Trek with Starship Enterprise. No.
Still not talking about the Star. Oh, we talked about the Star films before.
We're not talking about Star Trek?
No, we talked about Star Wars.
Hmm.
So immediately that's lost.
What did you think of Friday's Mandalorian?
Oh, was nice. We saw Ahsoka Tano.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, but then again, with their Jedi thing, he formed attachments. We won't train him. Seriously.
Come on, all the fans are attached to him. Why?
I know all the fans are attached to him, but when she said because he formed attachment, we won't train him, that was like,
There's a few reasons why she doesn't want to train him, though.
well, if they don't really like abuse someone because of those, the empire wouldn't have existed in the first place.
Arguably true, yes. And he has a name,
Yeah,
Grogu.
what?
Grogu.
Yeah, Grogu. Video, that's hard to hear.
Enterprise law.
He allowed some companies to establish themselves and work independently.
Yep.
But then they had to pay a lot of taxes to the government, which basically took away most of their profit.
Right. So just like similar to Lenin, Gorbachev is going to try to add some elements of capitalism into his communism, right? So he's going to let small companies operate on their own. They set their manufacturing targets. They choose what they want to manufacture. They sell things directly to customers, and the state doesn't tell them what to do. Because of course, in classical Soviet times, if you work at a factory, the government tells you what to build and how to build it and how much of it to build, right? Here, of course, in a capitalist society, companies figure that out, right? They figure out what they're selling, what the interest is, what they think, what their sales forecasts are, and then they build accordingly. But in the Soviet system, the government does all that. And so Gorbachev is saying, we're not going to tell you what to do anymore. You figure it out. Go sell things to customers. Go and be free, but also pay us lots of tax, right? And so we read on Thursday, sometimes those taxes vary from 50 to 90% in some cases, although that 90% gets reduced. But still, what is the incentive for setting up your own business if the government will just take all of your profits anyway? I guess you get a little more freedom, but still, you're not making any money.
10% is better than nothing.
It's better than nothing, but it's not that much, especially when anyone who runs their own business will probably tell you that running your own business is a lot of work. Right, so is this successful, this enterprise law?
No.
Because like the small businesses, they're small business, they don't really know how to go on their own.
Yeah, so so and we'll see this a little bit, but yeah, the Soviets don't have any experience with private business, right? They've gone from feudal serfdom to communist state, right? They've never had capitalism. They don't know how this works, and so there's a bit of a learning curve for the Russians as they try to figure out how private businesses should operate. And then, of course, we saw that the government was buying up a lot of the products of these businesses anyway, so they never actually make it to the market to be sold. And so, again, and then there's the tax thing.
There's a tax thing, and then there are the other people, the rest of the people. They didn't like the idea. Like, you know, they were, again, from feudal serfdom to communism. They didn't have that part in their culture where people could own their own businesses and start stuff, so it was kind of not okay.
Yeah, there's kind of a social condemnation that happens, right, with people who are starting to raise themselves up. They've had decades and decades of people being reasonably equal, right? And even here in the West, don't you sometimes see like someone driving by in like a $300,000 car, and you look and you're like, what a jerk. I bet that guy's a jerk, right? Yeah. Don't you ever do that? Yeah. So, even here in a capitalist society, sometimes we see people with a lot more and we're like, oh, God, right? So, again, imagine a society where everyone has been pretty much economically equal for a long time, and then they see people starting to get a little bit richer, right? They're very sensitive to that, right? And so, yeah, I guess it's a good idea from Gorbachev, but it doesn't really add up to anything. It doesn't really pay off for him, unfortunately.
I want to ask, if everything is given to them by the state, and their food, their housing, their schools, everything is paid by the state, why do they even have money?
Why have money?
Yeah.
I think because it becomes a way of controlling that, right?
But shouldn't also like they'll provide you food and stuff, but like you have your own needs.
Yeah, like
They all it's all provided by the state, and the state owns every single thing, including what you're wearing right now.
but let's imagine we live in a communist state, okay? So I'm the Communist Party, I'm the government, you all are citizens, okay? So Ahmad's got a wife and 4 kids. And Aliana, you've got a husband but no kids. And Rose, you're just kind of single person living on your own in the Soviet Union, okay? So because Ahmad has more need, I have to pay him more, right? Because he's got 4 kids. You've only got 2 people in your household. You've only got 1. So how am I going to make sure that everybody gets what they need? Well, I make sure I pay people, right? So I know you've got 4 kids, so I know you've got to make X amount of money, and you've got no kids, so you have to make X amount of money. And I control all the prices, right? So this is one of the things that individual businesses and people have to figure out in a capitalist market, is not only how much to produce, but what the prices should be, right? Because if you're priced too high, people will stop buying. And so here in a communist system, I control what I pay you, but I also control what everything costs. And so I can kind of attempt to sort of work these numbers out so that everybody has what they need, but nobody really has much left over, right? Because again, I can control the price of food and bread and housing and all this kind of stuff. So it kind of works like, in a way, it works like a capitalist system in that you get paid and you go to the store and you buy food and things like that, and you buy your clothing. But because your pay is controlled by the government, and because all the prices are so tightly controlled by the government, they engineer it so there's not really anything left over for you. But again, it just serves as a way of controlling that access, right? Because we don't want Rose going and buying all kinds of stuff because she's only one person living in a household, right? We want to just give her what she needs. And same thing with Aliana, and same thing with Ahmad, right? So I think the money just serves as a mechanism to ensure that people get what they're supposed to get. I think.
Yeah, because I thought you just go to the shop and show them your ID and things like that.
No, I don't think it happens that way. And although it sounds nice, but the other thing is that the Soviet Union has to participate in foreign financial transactions as well, right? So they're selling wheat or buying wheat on the market. They're borrowing from banks, as we heard, and hopefully making their interest payments. So they actually need a currency in order to participate in global banking anyway. So I think you just extend it back. I don't know that anyone has really managed to run a modern state without money, as far as I know. Yeah. Right, okay. So let's see, we talked about Gorbachev here from Stavropol. We said he was a lawyer, right? He was educated at Moscow State University, got a law degree, I believe. Elected to Communist Party leadership in 1985. He's got these 4 kind of reforms, which I'm just going to skip through really quickly because we've seen those already and we've talked about them. Right. And so this is going to be important. At the 19th Party Congress, and so I'm not sure how the numbering works here because I thought Khrushchev was at the 20th Party Congress, and here this is the 19th, 20 years later. So I'm not sure if I have a typo in here or if something's.
Probably counted the same as Windows counted.
They count same as what?
Windows. Windows XP in the 77, 8, 10.
Maybe this was like, Party Congress Big Sur or something, if you're into Macs, I don't know. Anyway, at his party conference, he starts to propose some major elements of restructuring, okay? So what he's trying to do is downsize the Communist Party. And so he sees that there's a lot of people who have been in the party for decades. They're old, they don't want to change, they just want to do things the way they've always done them. They don't see any problems. And so Gorbachev's like, we got to get rid of the dead wood here, right? We've got to get rid of these guys and get some fresh blood in here, right? Some new ideas. And so he proposes kind of downsizing the party, so making the party smaller, and again, cutting loose some of the economy, right? Letting the economy regulate itself, which, here in capitalist societies, to some degree, that's what it does, right? The government does put restrictions in place here and there, but the market kind of regulates itself. And so Gorbachev is saying, let's try that. Let's set some of the economy loose and see if it will run on its own, right? Again, this speech and some of his ideas are met with all kinds of criticism, and they're met with criticism from both sides, right? So there's people on one side who are saying, no, it's too much change, right? You're going to turn everything upside down, Gorbachev. This is too much. It's too radical, right? Slow down. And then there's people on the other side who are like, no, you're not doing enough. You need to speed up, right? We need more change than this. This won't do it, right? This is a half measure. And so poor Gorbachev is stuck in the middle of these 2 sides that are attacking him, one because he's going too slow and the other because he's going too fast. So it's going to be a rough job for him. And again, one of the people who feels that he is moving too slowly is in fact Boris Yeltsin. And Boris will eventually wind up being president of Russia. But for now, he's a member of the Communist Party, and he's a critic of Gorbachev because he thinks more change is needed and Gorbachev's not moving fast enough. Okay. We talked about the Enterprise Law, what it was, and why it didn't quite work. Now, this is the other thing that we need to know, is that in his, at the 19th Party Congress, he adds this at the last minute, and he wants to create this, a Congress of People's Deputies. It's kind of a new Duma, if you will, because the Duma, of course, was kind of the provisional, it became a provisional government, but it was supposed to be representation of the people to the Tsar, right? And the 2 sides would work together. Of course, they didn't, but that was a plan, right? And so here he's kind of doing something similar. So he wants to create a group of elected members called the Congress of People's Deputies, right? And so again, he thinks that if the people have a voice, They will say what they want, and then the Communist Party can hear them, and the Communist Party can do those things, right? And so, yeah, he creates this legislative body that members are elected to the Congress of People's Deputies, and they become a part of the government, right? Which is a massive change, right? Massive, massive change from before, where the Communist Party just meets and then they tell everybody what to do, and the end, right? But here we're going to have free elections for people running in the Congress of People's Deputies. They're going to sit with the Communist Party and they're going to say what their ideas are. This is a big deal, right? And so the Congress of People's Deputies will have representatives from each of the republics, right? So the USSR is the United Soviet Socialist Republics. And so in that republic here, you can see there are 14 different republics. And so the Russian Republic is the biggest one, right? And then there's all these little ones that you can see: Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, or Belorussia as it's called at the time, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, what will become Kazakhstan but isn't yet, Turkmenistan almost. What's that?
Kazakhstan's at number 10.
It looks to be, yes. So Kazakhs, the Turkmen Republic, the Uzbek, the Tajik, and the Kyrgyz Republic, right? And so all of these eventually will become Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan and things like that. But for now, they are part of the Soviet Union, right? Part of this union of Soviet socialist republics. And people are going to get elected from each of these republics to go and sit in the Congress of People's Deputies. Okay? Good so far? Who named them? Well, they're probably named sort of as the Soviet Union starts to expand in the 20s.
That's such an interesting name. That's an interesting question.
Where the name Canada comes from? I wish I knew this story better than I do, but apparently it is a First Nations word for village.
I heard that's what too.
Yeah, there's these little very short minutes, like documentary minutes that the Canadian government produces, and there's one where they sort of play out the situation where a European explorer or priest has come to North America here, and he's trying to ask this First Nations person, what do you call this place? And the First Nations person is saying, here, it's our village, this is our village. And so he's saying, Kanata, Kanata, and so
So the same story for kangaroo.
for kangaroo.
Yeah, they asked the native Australians, what are those things? And they're saying kangaroo, which means I don't know. And then they that word.
Sure, it could be. Yeah, and again, the Kanata story, I don't know if that is a true story or not. I assume it is, but I don't know the exact history. But I think it's a First Nations or Iroquois word for village, and so it kind of, it's a place where people live, right? And so that word, I think, finds its way into European vocabularies, right? When you're talking to First Nations people here, you're always talking about the village. Where go back to your village. Can we visit your village? Where is your village? And so I think it kind of finds its way into their speech that way, I think. But I wish I knew the whole story. I know the story of the Canadian flag a lot better than the story of.
Well, we're all ears.
Yeah, tell us about that.
I'll tell you later. I'll tell you the flag later. But let's go back to the Soviet Union here. So we've got 14 republics, and they're going to elect people to the Congress of People's Deputies, right? So I think let me just look at this here. Let me just look at this, because I think. Okay, that's the revolution, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, political. Okay. We're going to skip over this, and we're going to, Yeah, and we're going to move to some video that I want to show you. And the video has is a great explanation of how the Soviet Union actually comes apart, because it's kind of an interesting process. And again, the textbook doesn't do a very good job of it, and the documentary we saw last week barely dealt with it either. So it's a really interesting little story, and so I would like to watch it. Now, here's the only issue. I have the documentary, and it's in four parts. Sorry, and so three of them are on YouTube, and one of them is not, because there was apparently a copyright claim, and so the video got blocked. But fortunately, I downloaded it before then. So, so basically, what we do is we have 2 parts on YouTube. 1 part I've put in Teams, and then the last part is on YouTube as well. Okay, so what we'll do. So for online people, I'm just going to give me 1 second. I'm going to post these in Microsoft Teams so that you can access them, and we'll watch the first 2 parts. I think the parts are 15 minutes each. We'll watch the first 2 parts. We'll have a break, and then we'll come back and talk about what we've seen. Okay. So just give me 1 second here. Okay. All right. So in Teams, I've posted both of those for you. As I say, they're 15 minutes each. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 40 minutes on our clock here. And so you'll watch part 1 and part 2, which will take 30 minutes, take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back here and talk about what we've seen, okay? Here we go. All right. Good luck, online people. We'll see you in a little bit. All right, and we are back. So, um, as you see, a little bit more detail about what's going on within the Soviet Union once Gorbachev comes to power, right? And we see kind of the idea that, like I mentioned, he's kind of torn between two poles, right? There's a lot of people who are upset and angry, but there's people who are, I guess you could say, are on the right, who don't want change and just kind of want to do things the way they've always been done. And then there's people out on the left who want major reforms and democracy and capitalism and the whole thing. And Gorbachev's kind of more in the middle, right? He likes communism, he likes socialism. He's just trying to tool with the system in order to get the Soviet Union to run the way he thinks it should, right? But as they mentioned in the documentary, he kind of lets loose a bunch of forces. It's the Pandora's box thing, right? Once these things are out, they become difficult to control, right? And so he's talking about more openness. He's talking about less centralized control. He's talking about freedom for people. And people hear that message and they start to take that freedom, right? So we see in the Eastern Bloc countries, as soon as it becomes apparent that the Red Army is not going to roll in at the slightest little provocation, they start to push back, right? And they demand free elections from their governments. And again, they get them because A, the Red Army is not going to come in, and B, the communist leaders in the country know that the Red Army is not going to come in to rescue them, right? So they are totally on their own. And so they all very quickly revert to some form of democratic political assembly, and they sort of start moving along their own path. It doesn't mean that their problems are over, of course, because they've still got a lot of work to do, but at least they don't have the threat of Soviet tanks kind of rolling in, right? But yeah, you can see inside the Soviet Union, there's still a struggle as well. And so while the outside world sees Gorbachev as a hero and gives him the Nobel Peace Prize, and he's running around talking to world leaders, and he's a bit of a celebrity in this period of history, at least to the West. But inside his own country, it's a different story, right? And he's constantly, trying to walk a tightrope between, the hardliners who want to, keep the country where it is, and the reformers who are, ready to tear the country in two, or actually in 15 or 14 pieces. And so he's trying to kind of take a middle course and trying to sort of control these forces that he's set into motion, right? We see Boris Yeltsin, right? Communist Party guy, he's the deputy mayor, or he's the deputy, what did they call him? What was his post of Moscow? Deputy Secretary of Moscow. Yeah, and then he becomes Minister of Infrastructure, right? But then we see that he's using populist appeals in order to criticize the communist government, right? So he's listening to the people, what the people are saying, and then he's like, yeah, you're right, people, this is the problem. And then he gets up in front of the Communist Party and says, this is the problem. So he's kind of championing their perspectives, right or wrong, but that's kind of elevating his power, right? That's getting more people behind him. And so Gorbachev has kind of had enough of this populism, and he demotes Yeltsin, right? But then again, once he creates this Congress of People's Deputies, Boris runs for it and wins. And the next thing you know, he's in the Congress of People's Deputies, right? He's back in power, barking in Gorbachev's face about how he's not reforming enough, right? So Gorbachev tries to get rid of him, but again, his reforms make it so that Boris Yeltsin can get back into power. What else did we see there?
What was the starting of this video? Where like the tanks are going or something?
Oh, that's usually the Soviets would have some sort of a celebration parade kind of thing. So
That guy was.
when he was almost under the tank. What's that?
That was a protest.
That's a
Where it was definitely a protest.
that was definitely a protest. I'm not sure where it was. Probably in Eastern Bloc country, maybe. Although there's a tank situation in Moscow that we'll deal with shortly. But it probably is. Yeah, it's probably a protest, and so I assume he wasn't smushed. But
It stopped right there. Like,
It didn't. It was still moving. It was still moving when the video stopped.
you know, that's one of the things I think we should think about, though, too, is that, it's very easy to talk about these things now and put them on the screen and, kind of learn and make jokes and all that stuff. But, it's another thing to think about, these people believe so strongly in what they wanted and from the government or from the political situation that they are laying down in front of tanks in order to make themselves heard, right? And so, think of the things that would make you lay down in front of a tank. I assume there are not many. I assume there are not many things that would make you lay down in front of a tank. And so, that's pretty impressive, but it also shows you how strongly and firmly people wanted their freedom, right? And we saw some footage from the Berlin Wall, right? The Berlin Wall coming down, and again, that's another one where, eventually it just, it happens, and people are willing to risk it, right? They're willing to climb up on the wall and start pulling other people up onto the wall, and then people start to hammer away at it with chisels and hammers, and finally they break through. They open it themselves, and again, there's border guards there, as there has been for decades, but they kind of know it's over as well, right? So the border guards see what's happening, and they're like, you know what? It's done, right? Like this whole thing is over.
It was funny about the border guard that they didn't mention. It was that East Berlin government. They said that okay, from tomorrow you can travel to West Berlin freely. But that night the people heard it and they couldn't wait until daybreak. So they marched through the checkpoints. And imagine yourself, you're one guard with an AK-47 and a whole thousands of people are marching towards you. What are you gonna do?
It's true. Yeah,
The gates.
there's a power in numbers.
only one guard guarding that wall.
No.
There's more than that, but of course, nobody in their right mind would try to cross the wall, a year before, or 2 years before, or even a month before, right? So it's kind of an unprecedented situation that they're dealing with. The other thing is that parts of the border had been opened earlier on, right? So they said earlier on Czechoslovakia and Austria had cut a hole in their wall, and so people were actually going into Austria and finding their way, or into Czechoslovakia and then out from behind the Iron Curtain through Austria. But then that was limited because Austria didn't want all of these Eastern Bloc refugees, and so they kind of said, hold on, and then people went another way and they tried to find their way out, and eventually there's so much pressure in Berlin that, people know it's done, right? It's over. So we see the Berlin Wall coming down. What else?
Like when there's people buying bread or something.
Oh yeah, we saw people at the grocery store. Of course, I don't know if it counts as a grocery store if you have no groceries. I think it's just an empty building. But yeah, there's nothing there, right? You look in the cases, the cooler things there that you see at this grocery store now, there's nothing in there, right? And
A lot of oranges. Not oranges, apples.
we do see some apples, right? But yeah, in a lot of cases, there's nothing there, right? And again, it's important to remember that Soviet citizens are not enjoying a very high quality of life, right? So it's, they are, they're not there for their frozen pizzas and Ben and Jerry's ice cream. They're looking for sugar, bread, meat, coffee,
Something to put in their mouth.
bread,
What I found funny,
maybe cheese if you're lucky.
when that girl was talking about the bread thing.
The old lady.
Yeah, someone behind her was eating ice cream.
Mm.
Oh, there was another one. They eat some ice cream. Yes, she was the top layers of the society people.
Could be. The Russians do like their ice cream, as we all do, of course. But yeah, she's a pretty unhappy woman, right? Because she's, you know, this old woman, and she's just trying to shop for her and her neighbor, and she's like, this is all I could get, right? Like, she goes to the store and she cannot get enough food to feed herself and her neighbor, right? That's bad news, right?
They asked the old lady about what, and then she turns out to be really upset about it.
Yeah, what did they ask her? They said, oh, did you see? There was, I think there was some sort of party.
There was the newspaper, the party election.
Yeah, there was some sort of news, thing on the news about the Communist Party or the government, and so they said, "Oh yeah, did you see it last night?" And her face kind of said it all. Eh? She's like, "Yeah, they just talk, and nobody says anything. Everyone's shouting on top of each other. It's a circus, right?" So she's disgusted by the whole thing, and again, you know, this poor woman cannot get enough food. You know, never mind for a few days or for a week or whatever, but she can't even get enough to feed her and her neighbor for the next day or so. So things are bad, right? What else do we see here? Anything? Yeah, lots of good primary source interviews, right? We see Alexander Lukashenko and Anatoly, what's his name? What's his last name? Lukashenko and Alexander's Lukashenko, and the other one's Anatoly. Shoot. We see some people who are actually like high-ranking Soviet government communist officials at the time, right? So they have a front row seat to the things that are happening, and we get to hear from Gorbachev himself, right? Who's a little older now than he is in the video, but older and maybe wiser. I don't know. He has really small lips. I didn't notice that about him. Yeah, no, he has a very I guess distinctive birthmark on his head, right? So that's what makes him. That's kind of one of the things that stands out about him. I didn't notice his lips, but sure.
Well, we saw him on the Times magazine cover saying man of the decade.
Yep, he was man of the decade, not man of the year, but man of the decade, right? Yeah, wins a Nobel Peace Prize. Maybe not entirely on purpose, but maybe partly on purpose.
They mentioned something about Hitler.
Right, they were talking about the Baltic republics, Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania, that were pretty much independent until Stalin he unindependented them, right? So the sort of non-aggression pact between Stalin and Hitler. When Hitler invaded Poland, Stalin invaded the other half of Poland in 1939, and then Stalin decided to take Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania that were kind of liberated from the Soviet Union at the end of World War I, right? So he takes them back, but then once Gorbachev starts to loosen his restrictions and Eastern Europe starts to break away, those three republics say, hey, we're out of here too, right? We're out of, but then does Gorbachev just let them go?
No, he comes out and gives a speech and says, I'm not going to let you go.
Yeah, he kind of goes old Soviet leader on them, right? And so why the difference? Why is he so relaxed about?
Eastern Bloc were countries who were official, like technically speaking, on paper, were governments independent from the Soviet Union and
Mhm.
were obliged to just by the Warsaw Pact. Those three nations were in the USSR. They were part of the whole thing, the big chunk of land.
Right. So Gorbachev seems to have a bit of a difference between Warsaw Pact countries and republics that are part of the Soviet Union, right? And so when Eastern European countries are kind of breaking off and going their own way, he's okay with it. But then when actual republics start to push for independence, he says, no, you won't do this, you won't leave the Union, you won't go against your conscience, right? But I don't know, it seems like their conscience is pulling them away from the Soviet Union, not toward it. But, that's what he was thinking, right? Okay, so tomorrow we have our quiz. Oh yeah, shoot. Right, so I'll do, for people who are online, I will do the online, I'll do the online quizzes first from 8 to 9, and then at 9 o'clock the in-class ones will start. If you are someone who's normally coming into class, I would like you here tomorrow because I probably won't have enough time to get through everyone if everyone decides to stay home. So if you are coming into class, usually I'd like you to come into class tomorrow so that you can write your quiz. That'll make it much easier for all involved. And yeah, we'll do that quiz, and then we'll just have 3 more days to wrap up the 20th century.
So that was 31 to 42.
I think I went to 45 because 45 brings us to the end of World War II and the beginning of the Cold War. So it was a nice sort of, it was a good place to draw the line. Yeah. Yep.
What's that?
Yeah, you have to concentrate. We're still doing a class here, Aliana.
Well, yeah, I still haven't generated any premises.
Does everything have to be, do I have to have the gun to your head all the time? Okay. Have a lovely afternoon the rest of the day. I will see you all tomorrow. We'll do the quiz, and then we'll wrap this thing up on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. Okay. Bye-bye.